Wishing you good evening from the UK. We're really pleased that you've all come along to this international event with me and author Mia Farlane when we're talking about our debut novels. If you'd like to, please introduce yourselves in the chat and say where you're from, and because we're quite curious also about what time of day it is for you.
So, morena kia koutou katoa in Aotearoa. Bonsoir and buenas noches, good evening, guten Abend, go afternoon if you're in Europe, and good afternoon or late morning if you're in the US. Hello and welcome wherever you are. My name is Mia Farlane.
Right, I'm going to, I never know which side to put this up, kick off with a reading from my debut novel, Sugar and Snails, which was shortlisted for the Polari First Book Prize. And Sugar and Snails is about a woman who's felt a misfit as a child, and she's taken the opportunity to reinvent herself in her teens, but solving one problem has created another, and she's lived with a secret at the heart of her identity for 30 years. Afraid she'll lose everything if that secret gets out. I'm going to read to you from the just into a few pages into the first chapter, when she's had a bit of a traumatic thing has happened to her, and her response to that is actually to self-harm, sadly, which is something that she's done since childhood. And she cuts her arm quite badly and then has to take herself off to the hospital to get that seen to. So we meet her there in the A&E department. At first, the A&E department seems like every other, the same weary people on the same jaded chairs, the same hiccuping lighting and ragged magazines, the tang of antiseptic that triggers the urge to pack away my feelings someplace the medics can't get to, safe from their condescension and contempt. Yet tonight, there's an extra element that, until I pause to analyse it, makes no sense. Compassion. It greets me in the soothing voice of the triage nurse who takes my details at reception. I shrug it off as due to youth and an unfinished apprenticeship in cynicism, until it pops up a second time in his grey-haired colleague, who lays a gentle hand on my shoulder as she ushers me through the swing doors to a couch in a curtained cubicle. It lurks again in the form of the bleary-eyed doctor, a petite woman sporting a turquoise sari beneath her white coat, who won't move an inch without explaining what she's doing. It's as if they're too gullible to register they're dealing with a self-inflicted wound. The nurse helps the doctor ease her hand into a latex glove. She rests my arm on a pillow and peels back the sodden cloths. Under the glare of the Anglepoise lamp, it looks like I've been attacked by a madwoman. We could arrange for you to talk to someone about this. The stick-on bindi between the doctor's eyebrows brings to mind that first bauble of blood. Entirely up to you, Diana, but it might help. I smile non-committally as she shoots anaesthetic into my arm. The doctor is so well-intentioned, it would be churlish to argue, but NHS bureaucracy would surely save me from that indignity. All those letters shuttling back and forth to help me scramble onto the bottom of rung of a lengthy waiting list. Simon would be back from Cairo before my appointment came through. It's a lady called Pammy, says the doctor. She's very sympathetic and discreet. Tammy, says the nurse, handing her colleague what looks like a pair of slimline pliers. Tammy Turnbull, the liaison nurse. The doctor eases black thread through my skin with the pliers, double wrapping it around the tip to form a loop. Comes on at duty at 8, doesn't she? The nurse passes her a pair of scissors to finish off the stitch. 7:30, even less of a wait. You want me to see this liaison nurse here this morning? The nurse strokes my knee. Try and relax for doctor if you can, Diana. Won't be much longer. When I was 13, my mother took me to Lourdes. Don't let on what we've come for, she whispered as we boarded the coach. So many people, so many queues, ever anxious of joining the wrong one. Lining up for breakfast in the hotel. Lining up again at the stalls near the grotto to buy holy water and souvenirs. Joining up with pilgrims and penitents of every nationality to process by candlelight through the nighttime streets, waiting to be dipped head to toe in the water. One queue for the able-bodied and another for the cripples. What have we come for? I said. A miracle, of course, said my mother. Why else would I bring you? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Anne. So I have a question for you. I'd like to ask you about your writing process, especially your decisions around structure, the order that the story is told. For example, it is so brilliant, the seamless time shifts in Sugar and Snails, how the story keeps folding back on itself as it moves forward, how it all unravels. As a reader, I felt as if I was buckled in and fixed to the rails. Also, I think you took a risk worth taking in how you begin the novel, a bit like how people can tell you something dramatic about themselves when they first meet you as a kind of test of friendship, and they do it so as not to waste time. So I see your opening pages, and you've just read some of them, as like a challenge and a compliment to the reader, trusting this from the very beginning. Was that your intention? And could you talk about your choices around what you reveal and when, as it relates to the main character, Diana's secret?
Thank you for that. Well, the structure didn't come easily to me at all, and as it often is with the first novel, I didn't quite know how to get into the story. But I kind of thought that if I started by showing her vulnerability, then hopefully, without necessarily knowing the reasons behind that, then hopefully that people would be sympathetic towards her and able to empathise with her, even if they didn't know the reasons for it. But I did realise that I could have actually made it a lot easier for myself if I hadn't been so intent on keeping a background secret. But there were a few reasons for that. One, that I wanted people to meet Diana as they would in real life, and she's a very private person. So if you met her on the street or whatever, at a party, at a Zoom event even, you wouldn't really know much about her background. I also wanted to increase the likelihood of people being able to identify with her, and that her story is actually quite an unusual one, but the predicament of being someone who's never felt very comfortable in her own skin is not unusual, and I wanted people to have the opportunity to identify with that without any preconceptions about other aspects of her identity getting in the way. And I also wanted readers to discover her secret at their own pace. And one of the things I really enjoyed about writing this novel was planting little clues along the way. Although again, that made it harder for me as a novice writer, because every scene had to work not just for Diana as she was on the surface, but for who she is underneath. So because the story relates to very much her predicament when we meet her, is due to events in her childhood, particularly in her adolescence. There's two strands to the story. So there's a contemporary strand that takes place actually in 2004, and then there's several scenes looking at her childhood memories in the 1960s and 1970s. And then about halfway, a little bit more than halfway into the novel, when after everyone has discovered her secret, then we can look again at the aspects of her childhood and see those in a very different light. And here the reader's experience is kind of has a parallel with Diana's own experience, because she is someone who's never been very self-reflective, and she was encouraged to draw a line under her past. But she really needs to readdress that, look at who she's been and where she's come from, in order to move forward, really. So it's about her also reflecting on who she is in order to be able to accept herself as she genuinely is in all the different aspects of her, rather than how she thinks she ought to be. And I think that's something that we do a lot, particularly in middle age, when there's this pivot between the past and the future. And Diana in the story is in her mid-40s. And so it's about her adolescence, but it's also about her middle age. But it's also about my middle age, because I actually started writing it after I'd been to a little school reunion with some friends, which was in our the year that we turned 50. And there were some people there that I'd kept in touch with over the years, and others that I hadn't seen since I was 15. And what happened was quite ordinary, really, excuse me. And yet for me, it was quite an amazing experience, even though it's quite simple, really, that just looking into the faces of those middle-aged women and seeing quite clearly, kind of underlying that, almost like as another layer of skin, the girls that they used to be. And of course, in a way, that's how we are as people, that we don't sort of shed one persona completely as we move on. We've got sort of these different layers. So I quite liked sort of thinking that I was writing a novel about that, about how we can have these different identities, and that's what I ended up with. So I think, yeah, so that's sort of Sugar and Snails, and which is available to read for free until the end of February for readers of my newsletter. But now I'm going to pass over to Mia, who's going to read us from Footnotes to Sex.
Thank you, Anne. Thanks very much. So I'm going to read from Footnotes to Sex. It's a tragicomedy about not knowing what you want to do with your life and idolizing, admiring someone who does know what she wants to do with her life. It's set in London and Paris, and it's about a couple, May and Jensen, who are in a long-term relationship that's going through a tricky patch, partly because May is so very busy writing a PhD on Francine Prion, an intellectual she admires. I'm going to read two sections. The first one takes place in London, where May and Jensen live. Jensen speaks first. excuse me, just cough. I thought you decided you definitely weren't interested in doing the PhD. Until I've told Francine I've deferred, I have to keep working on it, don't I? Jansen gave that some thought. What? No, I was just wondering, I'm just curious. The thing is, you've got the ideal situation where you can actually meet up with the person you want to do your PhD on, and she's even willing to help you. She keeps lending you books and articles. She asks you when you're next going to visit. That's rare. What are you saying? Jansen said nothing. What are you saying? This was annoying. If you're going to start an idea, can you finish it? It has to be your decision, May. I don't want to tell you what to do. You've started telling me, so just tell me. You'll say no straight away. You think I ought to do the PhD? May guessed the obvious. Have you ever thought of asking her if she'd mind looking at your proposal? I haven't got a proposal, and Jansen knew that. You've made lots of notes for one, though, haven't you? Notes, yes, which meant nothing. She could have some advice, that's all. Now that she's back in Paris, she might even be able to help you get started, help you with the exact wording. May laughed. No, Francine is not like that. No. Well, I knew you'd say that. Jansen put on her chauffeur's blazer and picked up her bag. No, because I'm the one who has to do it. Oh, please write my proposal for me. No, that's not acceptable. Anyway, she already has helped me with it. I'm doing cross-dressing. All right, I knew you'd reject my idea, but I just thought, if you're now changing your mind and you're thinking again about doing the PhD, maybe you could ask her for some specific help. I'd have to write the proposal first, wouldn't I? I'd have to make some attempt, obviously. Yes, you would, darling, I've got to go. And why would I be asking for feedback on my proposal if I'd already submitted it last September? I'm doing the PhD, remember? I'm in the middle of it. Yeah, you'd have to let her know you hadn't started it yet. So the second piece I'm going to read takes place in Paris, and May is at a restaurant with Francine, who speaks first. These are the rest of my essays, Francine said, handing them to May. The ones that have not yet been published, but that will be out in April in my collection. You are going to be able to read them and come to the launch with questions to ask me. I don't think I'd see myself as capable of asking questions at a book launch. May put the folder straight into her bag. You were afraid of saying something stupid. It would be difficult to speak at a book launch, especially in French. May stared at her salad. She should start eating. Especially when one is shy, Francine said. It's the language too. Yes, yes, give yourself excuses. No, French is not my language, so it's difficult for me. May took a piece of bread and placed it next to her bowl of salad. It is a lack of willingness, a lack of courage above all. Language has absolutely nothing to do with it. It really is more difficult. Are you not going to eat your salad? Francine asked. You haven't started it yet. Yes, May picked up her fork. Then she said, I can talk more easily in English. It depends on the situation as well. With Jansen, for example, I talk a lot because we know each other well and we talk all the time. She talks, but I talk much more than she does. And yet I think she's more of an extrovert than I am. We really are very different. Fortunately, or there would be no interest in your being together. May started her salad. You read well, Francine told her, and she broke off another piece of bread. Thank you, May said, because that was polite. Not that she was sure she'd understood the compliment. Francine seemed to be saying, if that was possible, that she was quietly impressed with the various notes and letters she'd had from her. May felt as if she'd just been told she was beautiful. She felt liked. She felt perhaps even liked by Francine. And thank you, she felt flattered, for the essays. It was as if, in an understated way, Francine had told her she liked her.
Thank you, thank you. I'd also like to ask you about structure. So thinking as new writers, we're often advised to structure our stories around identifying what the main character wants and making them work hard to get it. On the surface, Footnotes to Sex follows that model. May wants to do a PhD, but is struggling to find a way in. Yet, on a deeper level, it's exploring how difficult it is for some of us to even know what we want, never mind achieve it. May has such a flimsy sense of her own identity. She clings on frantically to a former tutor's throwaway suggestion she might be suited to academia, and is so eager to please Francine, even she, who initially welcomes a new acolyte, becomes frustrated. Meanwhile, she neglects the relationships at close hand with her partner Jansen, with her sister Elizabeth, and also with the pupils in the job she hates. And I love how you draw this out through the contrast between Francine's intellectualism and some of the very minor details of May's everyday existence. I found this both laugh out loud funny and desperately sad. Is this what you intended from the start, or even what you intended at all?
And so thank you, Anne, for the very interesting question and perceptive comments. And thank you too for the wonderful review that you wrote on your anthology website. I found it very funny and insightful. So to answer your question about intention, I intended to write an inspiring novel about a woman who succeeds. That was my intention. And then I started writing some months, or perhaps it was the following year, I started writing. I don't plot, so I just began. And the first thing I wrote was May letting Francine know that she was writing a PhD about her. And then I kept writing, and because I'm not a plotter, I was discovering along the way. And one of the things I soon discovered was that May had not in fact started the PhD, which made the writing then, when I had this discovery, more interesting, and it turned the novel into a tragicomedy. So yes, but not knowing where the novel was going, I felt very anxious at times, and I put this anxiety into the novel. I gave the anxiety to my main character, to May. And I sought outside help as well in books. So I read a lot of books, those you can do it type books, you can write this. And one of them was by Anne Lamott, Bird by Bird, that I'd really recommend. I also read those kind of books that you were talking about, advice to writers. And although they were frighteningly formulaic, some of them, they had a lot of interesting and helpful. They did, these books did bring up that idea of if you've got a character, they want something, put something in their way of getting it. And so, for example, if someone wants a chocolate bar, you've got a character who wants a chocolate bar, you couldn't just have them reach into the cupboard and get it. You don't have a story. It has to be difficult. It's locked, she can't find the key. So, you can't find the key. In May's case, already in the novel, there was this inbuilt obstacle, which is that she didn't actually know what she wanted, as you point out. Also, she had an external obstacle, or you might call it a complication, which is Francine. Because when May contacted Francine, she didn't factor into the equation that she was dealing with another human being with their whole universe and their agenda. Francine is no puppet, so that made the writing more interesting for me as well, more complicated for May. So that's that. And then the whole time this is happening, May is neglecting her lovely partner. And I have this image of Jansen standing by what I would sort of something like a ship that's sort of sinking, or might be sinking. So you might call that comical, or some people might describe it as frustrating. Not knowing what you want to do with your life is a hard thing for some people. But having Jansen in the novel was important to me because she introduced something else, which is kindness. So I'll move straight on to ask you swiftly if you would please talk to us about Anne, your novel, Matilda Windsor is Coming Home. Matilda Windsor is Coming Home. It's due from Inspired Quill in May, so it's very exciting. I love the title. I think it's very appealing. It's simple, but there must be a lot behind the title.
So Matilda Windsor is Coming Home is about a brother and sister who have had no contact for 50 years, and the idealistic young social worker who's trying to reunite them. It's both funnier and more tragic than Sugar and Snails, and it's set mostly in a psychiatric hospital at the end of the 1980s, which is in the process of closing. The main character, Matty, has a reality which is very different to most people's, but she's nevertheless quite good company because she's very cheerful generally, and I think she's quite heroic really in how she's made the best of a bad situation. So, and if you subscribe to my newsletter, you'll get to hear more about it in the coming weeks, because that's published at the end of May. I know that you, Mia, have 2 more novels that I'm looking forward to read that since Footnotes was published, and I'd really like to hear a little bit more about them.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, just to go back to what you were saying, I really look forward to reading Matilda Windsor is Coming Home. I loved the main character in your first novel, and I feel that I've got the sense that I might feel the same. I really do about this next character. So to talk about my next books, the first one is Dotted Lines. It's a South London novel about the phenomenon within families of a pariah, a persona non grata. That does sometimes happen, and also I'm calling it a parody of chick-lit, that is, because there's failed intimacies in there. That's one of the themes. The next book, the third novel, which I'll talk a little bit more about, is Parallel Hell, and it's my most recent novel. I found it a very different experience writing that book in Aotearoa. That's the first time, but especially also I had this character with mental health issues, going through a very hard time, being both in a huge city, anonymous, which even if you've been there for decades is still anonymous, and then having her in a small town, her hometown what's more, which gave me a lot of situations that were rich for the novel. The last reason why it was a potent writing experience for me was the way I wrote it. So I got a grant, a writer's grant, while I was in New Zealand from Creative New Zealand, and I was therefore able to spend a lot of time with my main character. I wandered around Wellington as I had in London with her, or almost being her, and that was how I wrote the novel. So I put myself into situations that I then fictionalized, and in some cases I really was that character. I write about it in a piece called Are You Okay? A writing event that you can read. For my first novel, Footnotes to Sex, it was called a tragicomedy, which so this is Parallel Hell, quite different, but a lot of people describe Footnotes as very, very funny, and Badisha just compared it to Dorothy Parker, which was wonderful at the time. She compared the writing to Dorothy Parker, but now it's interesting because I have written a book about suicide, which is a subject that Dorothy Parker wrote about. Readers so far for Parallel Hell have described it as funnier than Footnotes. Not funny, ha-ha, obviously, because it's a serious subject, but I don't know whether you, like me, perhaps have been watching a lot of Netflix. You possibly have seen Nanette by Hannah Gadsby, that show. I relate really strongly to what she's doing with the humour there. It's a kind of subverted humour about something very serious. Footnotes to Sex is not Footnotes. Parallel Hell is not out yet. There isn't a publication date, but as soon as there is one, I'll be letting people know who are on my newsletter. So if you're signed up to the newsletter, you'll hear about it. Farlane on French writers, and one person will receive, this is a little offer going out there, a signed copy in the post. I'm going to just choose one person from my newsletter. I've just seen a question from Linda Collins, who's the author of Loss Adjustment, that was published and was a bestseller in Singapore, and then was republished by Our Press here in Aotearoa in New Zealand, and is a superb book, and I loved it, and I do recommend it. It's thank you for your question, Linda. Was it, I have to reread it, traumatic? I think that was the question. Cause you trauma? I wouldn't say it caused me trauma. I think the subject itself is difficult, and writing about it was the only thing I wanted to do. So I was very in this subject. Some people might say, yeah, well, I was as obsessed as my main character, but I was just so interested in reading everything about suicide. It's a subject that, yeah, what can I say? I'm not sure that that answers your question. It didn't cause me trauma. No, it didn't cause me trauma. Does that answer the question? Are there any other questions?
I'm going to ask you another question, Mia, because when we were planning this originally, we did think we might ask each other 2 questions. And my second question to you is, do they have sex?
Ah, okay. Are you talking about Footnotes to Sex? Yeah, I'm happy to say that, well, I can't answer for them, that's their business. But in the book, they do not have sex. So there's a spoiler for you. In the actual book, you don't get to read about it, but perhaps they're just very, very private. Oh, Alan, hello.
I was just going to ask, as the book's just been written, how did COVID and these times play into the book and the themes of suicide, or did it have any, or as a plot, or?
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting question. Because of COVID, I was, of course, in lockdown in London for the whole of, or almost the whole of 2020. And I was just in one place. I wasn't going anywhere. And I went on a lot of webinars about related to suicide. I went to mental health suicide awareness days. I spent about 3 days running, going to those things which I wouldn't have been able to do. So I went to one in Slovenia. I went to one in Wisconsin, and so it fed into the novel in that way. Yes, apart from that, it didn't because I'd already completed the storyline had finished in 2019, and so the novel finishes then. There's a question from Sarah Pleshier. Next projects. Would you like to talk about yours first, Anne?
Yeah, I can do, because it links to something that was mentioned before about the writing in the pandemic. So I've told you about my next novel, Matilda Windsor's coming. Oh, I can't even say it now. Matilda Windsor's Coming Home, and that took me nearly 7 years to write, and I finished my own edit before passing it on to my publishers properly. But in, I think about May or June or something, May I think, and I was already sort of 2 months late because I couldn't let it go. And but it was that editing on what was such a good lockdown project, because it was focused. I was obsessionally going through for duplicate words and all that kind of thing, and so it kept me focused, but I didn't have to think up any new ideas. So it was really, you know, a way I would have been, didn't feel very creative, but it gave me sort of plenty to do and, you know, distracting from the anxiety. And I've never sort of been interested in sequels. I'm not interested in reading series or anything like that. But as soon as I'd let my character go, and it was a relief to let her, to send that off to the publishers. Then I started thinking about her again, and I had about 2 days space from her. And because she's 70 in this novel, it's set in, starts in 1989, I assumed that she would be dead by now. And then I thought, what if she's this 100-year-old woman living in a care home, and because she's quite grandiose in her attitudes, it's, you know, it's that's part of her disturbance and part of how she keeps positive, because she in the first book she's in the psychiatric hospital, but she thinks it's her family's stately home. So then I kind of started thinking of this other scenario for her, you know, how she would be in this care home, and deciding that she needs to put on a big do for her 100th birthday, once she realizes this is going to happen, and she's going to have a big performance. And they watched The Trooping of the Colour in 2019, and she kind of gets the idea of having something big like that. And then it's lockdown. So this, I mean, I really have no idea whether that'll be like a complete turn off for people, because they'll be so sick of anything to do with the pandemic. But yeah, so that's part of what, but I've kind of had a break from that for a while, but I'm eager to get back to it soon, because it's about the whole of the year as well, looking at the stuff about Black Lives Matter as well. So yeah, so we'll see. That's my next thing. But yeah, what about you, Mia?
Yes, so yeah, I have really mainly been focusing on parallel hell. I've started a next novel. I've got I'm a few thousand words in, but it's so early that I really can't talk about it. Yes, so that's the answer to that.
Let's say farewell. Do you want to say it in all the languages?
Yes, so I'd like to thank Kristen Phillips again for being a wonderful host. And also just looking at you here, those of you who are here, thank you very much for coming.